Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and finally getting a chance to use these new stencils from the Simon Says cherished release. I had so many of you saying you couldn't wait to see what I did with stencils. So of course I couldn't decide on just one to use, so I decided to use all three. So I'm starting with some sea glass cardstock from Simon. I have these pieces cut down to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And I was just applying a tiny bit of adhesive on the back of each piece and then temporarily adhering them just to some copy paper here. So I've got all three pieces, and then I am using one stencil at a time, and I'm going to use different colors of texture paste, because same thing. I couldn't decide on what stencil, couldn't decide on what color, started going through my texture paste and was like, there's several ones I've got here that I have not used in forever, if at all, like such as this one. This is Viva Modeling Cream in Champagne, which is absolutely gorgeous. So I'm just holding the stencil in place and then scraping the modeling cream over it. This has a really smooth consistency, really easy to spread. You could definitely tape down your stencil if you want, but I found if I was just holding it in place, it was fine. And I'm just using this wide palette knife to scrape it down. And then as soon as I remove my stencil, I was taking it to the sink and washing it off. Otherwise, like put it in a dish of water, anything like that. You don't want to let that dry on your stencil. So I washed it off, came back, removed my cardstock from the copy paper, and then I just set it aside to dry. And I'm going to do the same thing with the next piece. So I'm grabbing the second stencil, and then this time I'm using some Faber-Castell Texture Luxe in Silver, which has pretty much the same consistency as the Viva Modeling Cream. Maybe slightly thinner, but same sort of idea. It's really metallic, really smooth and creamy. So picking it up and then just scraping it over my stencil. And honestly, when I was doing these, I was pretty much just playing around. I wasn't sure what I was going to create. I just wanted to see how these would look on this sea glass cardstock. I just thought it'd be kind of a pretty contrast. So scrape this all on. I was trying, you don't have to be perfect with it, but I did want with these ones with the smoother consistency, I kind of wanted it not to have any like gouges or anything in it. So I was using the palette knife just at an angle and trying to keep it smooth. And same thing, cleaned off my palette knife immediately. I just used a baby wipe for that. Peeled off the stencil here, went to the sink immediately, washed it off. So again, took this off the copy paper, set it aside to dry. And then I'm going on to do my last card here, what will be a card front. So this time I'm using the Heart Mandala, yeah, stencil and Viva's Gold Pharaoh. I've used Pharaoh before. I think I used silver like forever ago. I remember getting the gold. This is the first time I think I've ever used it. It's very thick. I think mine's a little bit thicker because it's been sitting for a year or two in a container, but it's thick in the sense that it has like a sand texture. It's very thick and very gritty. So, and of course I picked the most intricate stencil to use it with, but it works. You just need to be careful with it because like I said, it's very gritty. So I just scraped it over this stencil. I was trying to be like kind of scrape from the center outwards with this one because this stencil has so many like open areas and bits and pieces that aren't connected to anything else. And it worked just fine. There's a couple parts that I was pressing too hard with the palette knife and I kind of ruined like the edge right in the center right, I guess. So I didn't get the crisp like outline, but I was okay with that because I was going to cover it up anyway. But yeah, scrape this off. And with this stuff especially, you need to clean it immediately. Like you almost can't move fast enough. I quickly wiped off my palette. I took this to the sink immediately. It still left some residue on my stencil. I just rub it under the running water with a little bit of soap and just use my hands and I'm able to clean it off. But this stuff kind of just gets everywhere, but it's really pretty. I like it. So did all three pieces. I let them dry. I actually ended up letting them dry overnight because I lost inspiration, wasn't sure what I was going to do, and then came back to them. And ended up die cutting them with the second largest basic rectangles die from Simon. And then I die cut some vellum with one of the new wonky heart dies, the smallest one. So I die cut 3 pieces of vellum. And then I die cut some sentiments from some black cardstock. So I'm using the large word U from Simon. And die cut that 3 times, so I'm going to stack all these sentiments using my Nouveau adhesive and stacking them so they're all 3 layers thick. So did that with all of them, just trying to apply the adhesive as thin as possible so it's not oozing out everywhere. I've been using this adhesive pretty much in every single video for I don't even know how long now. Still really liking this stuff. So just trying to make sure. The biggest issue I ever have with it is just applying too much of it, but it comes off easily and it's not sticky after it dries. It dries just clear and not sticky, just because I've had people asking that. So got all my sentiments stacked, and then I chose companion stamp sentiments for all of these die cut words. I'll have links to like all the supplies, like all the stamp sets I used, all the dies I used, because of course I used a ton for making all of these. So I got out my coordinating stamps that I wanted to use, and I decided I was going to emboss all these onto those vellum hearts. So all of the hearts, I'm using anti-static powder first, and then I'm going to stamp each sentiment with Simon's clear embossing ink. And the nice thing about having it on vellum is I'm able to line up the vellum on my grid paper, see the lines through it, and then stamp the stamp using those grid lines to make sure it's straight. And then I'm going to emboss everything with Wow's Detail Black. This is the Primary Ebony embossing powder. I've had a lot of people asking why I don't use like stamp images with a black pigment ink, like VersaFine embossing with clear. Honestly, I prefer the look of black embossing powder. I don't like working with black embossing powder because it likes to get everywhere and make a mess, but it looks nicer, especially on vellum. When you stamp with black ink and emboss with clear on vellum, there's a huge difference. It's not as black, it's not as crisp in my opinion. I really like how just the black embossing powder looks. And this Wow Primary Ebony that I've been using for a few months now, I'm really liking it, especially on vellum. I have less issues with the little, like the black embossing powder getting anywhere it's not supposed to, especially when I use my anti-static powder tool. So yeah, stamped all my images, held the vellum with my tweezer, heat up all of those till they're melted, which only took a few seconds. And then I needed to fix a little bit of the mess I made because I got my finger on that silver paste before it was dry because I couldn't leave well enough alone. So to kind of fix that, because it was pretty obvious, you could literally see my fingerprint in the smear, I just picked up a little bit more of that Texture Luxe and scraped it right over the smear I made with the palette knife. It's still not perfectly smooth, but I'm okay with that. It covered up the really obvious mess I'd made. So I just scraped it over it and let it dry. It was good. And then I was planning on adhering one of the sentiments kind of over it to mask it up a little bit more too. So did that. And then to adhere my die cut sentiments to the vellum, I'm just applying adhesive to the areas that will directly adhere to the vellum. And again, using a really light hand because I don't want this oozing out around the edges, especially on vellum. And then lining up the heart again on my grid line so that I can line up the sentiment and then pressing that onto the vellum. So I did that with all of the sentiments, adhered them where I wanted on their little vellum hearts. And then to adhere the vellum hearts to the cards, I'm going to flip these over and apply adhesive again just to the die cut sentiment. And using a really light hand on the spots where it's over the vellum because I don't want that adhesive oozing out behind the vellum because you will see it, especially with this adhesive, you will see it because you can see it right there. You can see the spots where the glue is adhered to the cardstock. It's just plain as day. So I was very light-handed with the adhesive, applied a little bit more to the areas that weren't behind the vellum, and then adhered all these to my card front and put acrylic blocks over it while it dried so that it could adhere really well to all this embossing paste. The Texture Luxe and the the Texture Luxe and the modeling cream, really easy. This Viva Ferro, like I said, it has that really gritty texture, so I wanted to make sure I adhered that really well to that. So did all of that, set those aside to let those dry, and then my card bases were heavyweight white cardstock cut to 4 1/4 by 11. So I'm going to score all of these at 5.5 inches with my Teflon bone folder. I've just been lining everything up in my paper cutter at the 5.5 inch mark, and then I just use the groove where the cutting blade goes for my bone folder. So score a line, fold it in half, and then I press the line down or press the score down with the bone folder again so that it gives it a really good crisp fold. So did all of that, and then I had more sentiment stamps picked out to stamp on the insides of these cards, and I originally planned on just stamping the sentiments, but I was like, that's kind of boring. But I was like, what am I going to do? Because, I don't have any stamped images. I didn't want to pull out anything else. So I was looking at these stencils, and I was like, these would look really pretty if I sponge some ink over them onto the inside of my card. That's another question I'm getting a lot of from people since these stencils were released. They're like, they look so delicate. Are you going to be able to do anything with them? And honestly, when you get them and you actually hold them in your hands, they look really delicate, but they're not. They're not flimsy at all. They're like any other stencil. Like, I have no problem doing any of the same techniques I would do with any other stencil. So that's what I did here. I just taped down the two corners of each stencil onto the inside corner of all these cards. And then I'm just sponging some Simon Says ink over that. It's not Sea Glass, it's one of their other inks. I have it written down. Lakeshores. So I'm using Lakeshores ink here. And I'm just picking up the ink with one of my mini ink blending tools and then rubbing a little bit of it off onto that same typing paper there so it's not so intense. And then concentrating the color to the bottom lower corner and then pulling it out and letting it fade to nothing the closer I get to the edge of the stencil. So with the first two, that worked fine. With this heart mandala, again, this one is the most delicate of all of them just because of the way the design is. And there's all those little like edges and tips that aren't connected to anything else, so those could easily fold. But I found with the embossing paste, it was fine. With sponging, it's hard, I can't really show on camera, but I wasn't really lifting my sponge very much. I was keeping it fairly flat to the card and just using really small motions, not really big, big wide circular. No, those would probably catch on those edges. So I was just using really, really tiny little circular motions to sponge, and it was fine. And same thing, kept the ink kind of concentrated towards the lower corner and then letting it fade out without re-inking the tool as it got to the edge of the stencil. So that kind of finished off the like decorative part of the insides of all my cards. And then now I can ink up all my sentiments with Simon Says Intense Black ink and stamp those onto the insides of my cards. And I didn't use a Misty this time. I thought about it. I should have, because I could have double stamped everything and made them perfect. But I had such a mess going on. I didn't have space for the Misty. That plus I just wanted to, not use it for once. So inked up my stamps with that intense black ink and then was stamping them off onto the copy paper as well because a couple of these are brand new stamps. I hadn't inked them up before. So inked them up, stamped them a couple times on the scraps, and then stamped them onto the inside of all the cards. So once all the sentiments are stamped, and I made sure that I was stamping the proper sentiment with the proper stenciled image that would match the outside of all these cards because I was doing different sentiments for all these cards just for some variety. So once I had all those stamped, I'm going to use my Nouveau adhesive again on all of these stenciled card fronts and adhere that. And again, light hand with the adhesive. I made sure to apply it kind of liberally all over the back of all these stencil pieces, but not so thick. You don't want the glue oozing out anywhere. You also don't want it warping. So it looks like a lot of adhesive, but really I'm barely squeezing the bottle. So I adhered all of these to the card bases. And of course I had to add some sequins. So I pulled out my Simon Says Moonstone sequins and just kind of sprinkled a few of the different sizes on each of these card fronts right around the sentiments. And I'm going to pick them up with my little crystal katana and then adhere them into place with that Nouveau adhesive. And that was it. That finished off all of these cards. So again, I made sure to kind of not apply too much adhesive, and I was applying the adhesive right on top of the different embossing paste, not in between, because you want to make sure they're actually grabbing the sequins. And that was it. So as always, I will have links below the video to my blog post where I'll have all the pictures posted, as well as links to all of the supplies used. So if you're interested in any of that, check out the description box below the video, and especially check out my blog post, which will be the first link directly below, because on my blog, it's got picture links. It's a lot easier to see what everything is, the names, etc., etc. So check that out below if you're interested. And thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting on my videos. I really appreciate you guys taking the time out of your day. And I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye.